At Blackwood Prep, Sienna Sinclair was just another transfer student, quiet, composed, and effortlessly invisible. The school bullies, led by Vaughn, thought she was weak, just another easy target. They had no idea who they were messing with. Her father, Dominic Sinclair, was the most feared Mafia boss in the city, but Sienna had been trained since childhood. Never start a fight, never show weakness, but if they push too far, remind them why they should have left you alone. So when Tyler flipped her lunch tray, humiliated her in front of the entire cafeteria, and laughed in her face, she didn't get mad. She got even. And by the time he realized his mistake, it was far too late. Sienna Sinclair stepped through the grand iron gates of Blackwood Prep, her posture relaxed, her expression unreadable. The school was as elite as they came. Towering stone buildings, ivy-covered walls, and hallways filled with kids who had never worried about anything in their lives. But Sienna? She didn't belong to their world. Her father, Dominic Sinclair, had made sure she lived a life far from his empire, away from whispers of power, away from the weight of his name. Here, she was supposed to be just another student. At least, that was the plan. She kept her head down, spoke only when necessary, never drew attention. But bullies always had a way of finding someone different. And Vaughn? He was the kind of guy who thrived on making others feel small. Tall, arrogant, and the son of a powerful senator, Tyler ran Blackwood Prep like it was his kingdom. His crew, 3 other privileged kids who followed his every move, fed off his energy. Together, they were untouchable. So when Sienna ignored him, that's when he decided to make her his next target. First, it was just annoying little things. A shoulder bump in the hallway, a smirk when she dropped her books, notes stolen out of her bag before class. Sienna never reacted. She knew patience. She had been trained in it since birth. Her father's voice echoed in her mind. Control is power, Sienna. Never show them what you're thinking. And so she didn't. But Tyler? He took her silence as weakness. One afternoon, she walked into English class, only to find her chair missing. Laughter erupted. She didn't flinch. She just stood there, watching Tyler as he leaned back in his seat, arms folded behind his head. Something wrong, new girl? He smirked. The teacher entered. Sienna grabbed another chair and sat down without a word. Tyler's smirk faltered. He had expected anger, embarrassment, something, but she gave him nothing. So he pushed further. The Blackwood Prep cafeteria was a grand 2-story space with long tables stretching across polished floors. The kind of place where social hierarchy was law. Sienna sat alone, quietly eating. She was used to the isolation. It was easier this way. But Tyler couldn't let it go. He strolled over, his crew trailing behind. The noise in the room lowered just a fraction as students instinctively tuned in. All alone, Sinclair? Tyler's voice dripped with amusement. No friends? No life? His friends laughed, eating it up. Sienna continued eating, as if he wasn't even there. His smirk twisted into something harder. He hated being ignored. So he grabbed her lunch tray and flipped it. The plate crashed into her lap, food splattering across her uniform. Silence. Then, laughter. Loud and merciless. The room erupted. Even students who hadn't been paying attention before turned to watch. Sienna didn't move. She didn't wipe at the mess, didn't yell, didn't cry. She just looked at him, calm, unshaken, expressionless. And in that moment, Vaughn made the biggest mistake of his life. Because the way she looked at him, like he was already done for, like he just signed his own death warrant, like she was waiting. Tyler expected an explosion, a meltdown, something. Instead, Sienna stood up. She didn't rush, didn't panic. She moved with the kind of deliberate calm that made his stomach tighten. Though he didn't understand why. She didn't say a single word. She just walked out. And for the first time, Vaughn felt something he had never felt before. A chill, a warning, the undeniable feeling that he had just made a mistake. But it was too late, because now, the game had just begun. The morning after the cafeteria incident, Vaughn walked into Blackwood Prep with his usual arrogance. To him, nothing had changed. If anything, he was feeling good, confident. He had humiliated the new girl in front of the whole school, and she just walked away? That was an easy win. At least that's what he thought. Until he noticed something different. People weren't laughing today. They weren't even looking at him. Whispers filled the hallways. Not the kind that usually followed Tyler, the ones that made him feel important. These were different. They weren't about him. They were about her. Sienna Sinclair. By the time Tyler reached his locker, the unease had settled in. His friends, normally the first to slap him on the back and joke around, were quiet, shifty. He ignored it, until he opened his locker. Inside, a single playing card. The ace of spades. Tyler frowned, picking it up. "What the hell is this?" he muttered, turning it over. His friend, Connor, stepped closer, eyes darting around. "Dude, this isn't funny." "What isn't funny?" Tyler scoffed, trying to play it off. "It's just a stupid card." Connor didn't laugh. No one did. That's when Tyler noticed the fear. Not just in Connor. In everyone. Students whispered, their eyes flicking toward him and then quickly looking away. Some even moved to the other side of the hall. Something was wrong. But Tyler still didn't get it. It wasn't until third period that he finally asked the question. Sitting in history class, he leaned toward a sophomore who had been whispering with his friend the moment he walked in. "All right, what's going on?" Tyler demanded, his usual cocky smirk in place. "Why's everyone acting weird?" The kid hesitated, glancing at his friend. Then, quietly, he said the words that changed everything. "You don't know who she is, do you?" Tyler frowned. "Who?" "Sienna Sinclair." Tyler rolled his eyes. "Yeah, I know her name." "So what?" The kid swallowed hard. "No, you don't get it. Her dad is—" He didn't get to finish, because someone else did. From behind him, a girl muttered the name like it was a death sentence. Dominic Sinclair. Tyler's entire body went still. For a second, the world felt like it slowed down. Because now, the pieces started clicking into place. Sinclair. That name. That name. He knew it. Everyone knew it. Dominic Sinclair. The most feared man in the city. The kind of man whose name wasn't spoken lightly. The kind of man whose enemies disappeared. And he had just humiliated his daughter in front of the whole school. In front of everyone. The realization hit like a punch to the gut. He didn't just mess with a girl. He messed with the wrong family. The bell rang. But Tyler didn't move. Students got up, shuffling past him, their voices hushed. He could feel them staring, whispering, waiting to see what would happen next. He felt his throat go dry. For the first time in his life, Tyler Vaughn felt something he had never truly felt before. Not control, not confidence, not power. Fear. And worse, he didn't know what to do next. Tyler Vaughn had never been scared of anything in his life. Not of teachers, not of principals, and definitely not of some girl. At least, that's what he kept telling himself. But as he stepped out of Blackwood Prep that afternoon, a familiar weight of arrogance sitting in his chest, his confidence shattered the moment he saw them. Two men, standing by the entrance, dressed in dark suits, crisp and expensive. They weren't teachers. They weren't security. They weren't cops. And they were waiting for him. Tyler's steps slowed. A knot tightened in his stomach. Everything inside him screamed, "Walk away." But it was already too late. One of the men turned slightly, catching his eye. He had a calm, unreadable face, like someone who never needed to raise his voice to be heard. The other one didn't move, didn't blink, just waited. And then came the words, "Miss Sinclair wants to meet." Tyler's heart slammed against his ribs. The world around him faded. The students laughing. The cars pulling out of the parking lot. The teachers walking to their own vehicles. Everything else blurred. All that remained were those men and those words. Miss Sinclair. Sienna. His mouth went dry. He forced a smirk, but it didn't sit right on his face. "Yeah? Well, I'm busy." He tried to keep his voice steady. The men didn't react. Not anger, not amusement, not even disappointment. Just silence. Like they were waiting for him to realize the truth. That this wasn't a request. That his choice had already been made for him. One of them tilted his head slightly. "Get in the car, kid." Tyler sat in the back of a sleek black SUV, his leg bouncing. No one had touched him. No one had threatened him. And yet, he felt like he was suffocating. The silence in the car was heavier than anything he'd ever felt. The men didn't speak, didn't glance at him. They just drove. Away from the city, away from the school, away from anything familiar. Tyler swallowed. "Where are we going?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. No answer. He shifted uncomfortably. "Listen, man. If this is about lunch..." The man in the passenger seat turned his head. Just slightly. Enough to shut Tyler up instantly. He didn't need to say anything. The message was already clear. You don't speak unless spoken to. Tyler clenched his fists. His throat felt tight. He had never felt this powerless before, and it was only getting worse. The car pulled into a quiet, empty parking lot. Dimly lit. Isolated. No cameras. No witnesses. The knot in Tyler's stomach twisted painfully. The door next to him opened. He didn't move, not at first. Then, a single voice cut through the silence. "Get out!" It wasn't the men in suits. It was her, Sienna Sinclair. She stood a few feet away, dressed simply. Jeans, a fitted black jacket, hair tied back. She wasn't trying to look intimidating. She didn't have to. Tyler swallowed hard and stepped out. The air between them was thick. Sienna watched him, studied him, like a lion studying its prey. Not angry, not smug, not amused, just calm, like she had already won. Tyler forced himself to stand tall, to keep the same confidence he always had. But for the first time in his life, it wasn't working. Because she wasn't just some girl. She was a Sinclair. And Tyler Vaughn had messed with the wrong family. Tyler Vaughn had always thought he knew fear. That rush of adrenaline when a teacher caught him skipping class. That sinking feeling when his father got home in a bad mood. That brief moment of panic when a cop car pulled up behind him at a stoplight. But this wasn't fear. This was something worse. Sienna Sinclair stepped forward. Not fast, not aggressive, not with any sense of urgency, just deliberate, controlled, like she had all the time in the world. Tyler wanted to move, wanted to step back, but his legs wouldn't listen. She stopped just a foot away, her head tilting slightly as she studied him. Tyler swallowed hard. Look, I didn't—" Her voice cut through him like a blade. "You thought I was weak." No emotion, no raised voice, just fact. Tyler's throat was so dry he could barely speak. His mind scrambled for an excuse, an explanation, anything that would make this stop. It was just a joke." Sienna smirked. A small, knowing curve of her lips, like she was waiting for him to say that, like she knew he would. "A joke?" she repeated, as if testing the word. Tyler nodded quickly. "Yeah, that's all it was." His phone buzzed. His stomach dropped. His hands were shaking as he pulled it from his pocket. 6 missed calls. All from his father. His mother had sent 10 messages, and then, one final text, from an unknown number. Tyler's breath caught in his throat as he read it. "Tell your father to be more careful with his business. Accidents happen." His knees nearly buckled. His entire body turned to ice. This wasn't about school anymore. This wasn't just about him. Tyler's mouth opened, but nothing came out. The words weren't there anymore, because it didn't matter what he said. Sienna already knew everything, and that's what terrified him the most. She could have done anything. Ruined his reputation, had him expelled, sent someone to make sure he never stepped foot in that school again. Instead, she simply watched him fall apart, without touching him, without yelling, without even raising her voice. She didn't need to, because the damage had already been done. Tyler's breathing was uneven now. His hands trembled. Please." The word left his lips before he could stop it. Sienna took a slow step back, arms crossing over her chest. Then finally she spoke. "I could ruin you." Tyler flinched. She let the words sink in, waiting, watching, as the full weight of them settled over him. Then she shrugged. "But I won't." Tyler was too stunned to react. You won't?" His voice cracked. Sienna smirked, her gaze sharp. "No." She turned, walking a few steps away. Then, as if sensing his confusion, she looked at him over her shoulder. "Because you're already finished." Tyler blinked, his mind racing. Finished? What did that mean? Then it hit him. It wasn't about what would happen next. It was about what had already happened. The missed calls, the frantic texts, the message from the unknown number. His father already knew. His mother already knew. His entire family had just learned that he had messed with the one person he never should have. And now, he would live with that mistake. Every single day. Tyler didn't remember getting back in the car, didn't remember the ride home. His thoughts were a tangled mess of panic and regret. But he remembered the moment he stepped inside his house. The silence. The way his father stared at him. Cold. Disappointed. And the way his mother's hands shook as she held her phone, like she had just read something that made her stomach turn. Tyler opened his mouth to speak, but his father raised a hand. Not one word. And in that moment, Tyler Vaughn understood something he had never understood before. Real power doesn't have to prove itself. It just exists. And if you're stupid enough to test it, you don't get a second chance. The world around Tyler Vaughn had changed, but it wasn't the world that had changed. It was him. He walked through Blackwood Prep's crowded hallways the next morning, shoulders tense, stomach twisting at every glance, every whisper, every breath of silence that followed in his wake. The hall felt longer. The air felt heavier. His friends, Connor, Matt, Jordan weren't there. They had been waiting for him at the front entrance every morning for the past 2 years. Not today. Today, he was alone. And he knew exactly why. Locker doors slammed. Laughter rang through the hallways. Teachers called for students to get to class. Everything moved as it always had. Except for Tyler. He wasn't part of it anymore. Not really. Not after last night. He could still hear his father's voice. Low. Cold. Final. Do you have any idea what you've done? Tyler had stood there. Silent. Because what was there to say? How could he explain the gut-wrenching terror of standing in front of Sienna Sinclair last night? How could he describe the way her calmness was so much worse than if she had screamed at him? He had never been hit. Never been threatened. Never even been touched. And yet, it felt like he had been buried alive. She wasn't hard to spot. Sienna moved through the hallways exactly as she had before. Calm. Collected. Untouchable. She didn't look at him. Didn't acknowledge his existence. As if she had already erased him from her mind. Tyler felt his hands shake. How? How could she act like nothing happened? Didn't she feel it? Didn't she know that she had rewritten his entire world in just one night? He felt like a man who had stared into the abyss and barely walked away. And Sienna? She looked like she had already forgotten. By lunch, Tyler realized it wasn't just in his head. People were avoiding him. His friends, the guys who had stood beside him through every fight, who had laughed when he shoved smaller kids into lockers, who had cheered him on every time he humiliated someone, they weren't there. He found Connor at their usual table. But before Tyler could sit, Connor grabbed his tray and left. No words. No explanations. Just silence. Tyler's jaw clenched. He turned to Matt, but Matt wouldn't even meet his eyes. The only person left was Jordan. Tyler leaned in, whispering, "What's going on?" Jordan swallowed hard. His voice was barely above a murmur. "You should go, man." Tyler's stomach twisted. "What? Why?" Jordan's eyes flicked around the room, making sure no one was watching. Then, leaning in slightly, he whispered, "Because nobody wants to be around you anymore." Tyler sat frozen. He wanted to argue, wanted to tell Jordan that this was insane, but the truth was burning in his chest. He had been given a lesson last night, a lesson about power. He had spent his life believing that power meant being feared, that power meant controlling the room, shoving people around, making sure no one dared challenge you. But Sienna Sinclair had changed that, because she had done nothing. She never screamed, never fought, never threatened, and yet she had destroyed him. With just a name, Tyler Vaughn would graduate. He would leave Blackwood Prep. He would move on, or at least try to, but this would never leave him. Every dark alley, every unfamiliar car parked outside his house, every unknown number that called his phone. He would wonder if it was her, if she was still watching, if she was just waiting for him to slip up again. Because that was the thing about people like Sienna Sinclair. You didn't cross them twice. And if you were stupid enough to do it once, you spent the rest of your life looking over your shoulder. Because some people aren't meant to be messed with. And Sienna Sinclair? She was one of them. Tyler Vaughn didn't sleep that night. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the weight of the previous day pressing down on his chest like a heavy stone. His father had given him a single warning, one that chilled him more than anything else. Fix yourself, or someone else will. Tyler knew what that meant. The next morning at school, he felt like an outsider in his own life. The silence followed him. His once loyal friends refused to look at him. The power he had wielded so carelessly was gone. Sienna Sinclair? She didn't even acknowledge him. That was the worst part. If she had smiled, if she had looked at him with satisfaction, at least he could have told himself she cared. But she didn't. To her, he wasn't even worth remembering. As the days passed, Tyler realized he had no place here anymore. The whispers never stopped. The stares never faded. And the fear, the cold, unshakable fear, never left. For the first time in his life, he was the one looking over his shoulder. So one day, without telling anyone, he left. His parents pulled him from Blackwood Prep, citing personal reasons. No one questioned it. No one reached out. Because his story was over. But Sienna's? She was just getting started.